Welcome to Google Search Console, Managing Your Online Presence. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Rachel Reese from the marketing team at PhotoShelter, and today we are going to be learning more about how Google works, what Google Search Console is, how it can help with your SEO, and how to set it up. As always, we've done our best to keep this webinar broad enough so that all photographers can benefit from what you learn here today, not just PhotoShelter members, but we will be talking a bit about how to set Google Search Console up with PhotoShelter specifically, and some of our examples today will also be PhotoShelter specific. And now I'd like to officially introduce Amanda Yoder, who's going to be teaching us all about GSE today. Amanda is one of our amazing tech support specialists here at PhotoShelter, who was recently certified in Google Analytics and is one of our in-house experts on Google tools. And we are so lucky to have her with us today, sharing all of her knowledge on this topic. So Amanda, thanks so much again for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to get started. A lot of fun content to go over today.
Yeah, we're excited too. And before I hand things over to Amanda, just a note that we will be live tweeting during today's webinar, sharing more resources and information on this topic over on Twitter. So if you use Twitter, please feel free to follow along there too. We'll also include all of those resources in our blog wrap-up next week. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, we are recording this webinar and we will share the full recording and a wrap-up on our blog next week, and you will be emailed as soon as that's ready. All right, Amanda, I'm going to hand it over to you. Give me one sec.
Okay. All right, let's get started. So Rachel kind of went over pretty quickly what we're going to go over, but just to review what you can expect today from this webinar, we're going to talk about how Google works as a good foundation. After that, we're going to talk about how Google Search Console, a free tool from Google, can help boost your SEO. We're going to go over some demos about how to set up Google Search Console, and then take a look at some of the really awesome tools that are in Google Search Console. All right, so getting started with search engine optimization, also known as SEO. Obviously a hot topic right now. At PhotoShelter, we're talking about it a lot. We had a really amazing webinar with my colleague Jalan last Friday about just SEO best practices. So SEO is basically the practice of increasing the quantity and quality of traffic to your website through organic search engine results. So I say organic search engine results, meaning you didn't pay for it. You may have seen like paid search results at the top of some of your search result pages before when you Google something. That's a little different. We'll not talk about that today. Today we want to talk about how with SEO you boost your organic search. So that's basically free traffic through search. So we're going to talk mainly about Google and Google's Search Console tool. Google Search accounts for almost all of the searches on the web. The last metric I saw was about 92%. There are some other search engines out there, obviously, but generally, if you know how to use Google Search Console, that's a great baseline to go and start exploring those other search engine tools as well. All right, so before we can talk about the Google Search Console tool, it's really important to understand how Google works in the first place. If you don't understand that, the tool can get pretty confusing pretty fast. So let's go over this. All right, so a good thing to know is that search engines don't actually search the web. They search a database, or what we call an index. So if you can imagine, the entire World Wide Web is made of billions and billions of web pages. So I think there are more web pages on the internet than there are people on Earth. So if you can imagine trying to go track down everybody's mailing address and get information about them just to find one search query, that would take a really long time. So search engines make it a quicker process to find search results for you by managing their own private index. There isn't like a public index out there that search engines can go to that automatically gets updated with every web page that exists. They have to manage this themselves. So they have to create their own process of finding information about websites and storing that and organizing that. So to that means to appear in organic Google search results, your website, your web pages, or your photos have to be in Google's index. All right, so Google basically goes through 3 steps to get something into their index. The first step is discovery. So Google discovers a page's location or URL. I think it's helpful to think about a URL as like your street address. So in order for somebody to know where you are, they need to know your street address. In order for Google to know how to find your website or a specific page on your site, they need to know the URL so that they can figure out how to get there. The way that they do this is by finding links from other websites that they already know about. If other websites have links to your site or links to a page on your site. They also find that out by reading a sitemap. We'll talk about a sitemap a little more in a few minutes. And then this other phrase that is a direct quote from Google, many other means. So I'm not really sure what that means. You could ask Google what the many other means are that they use. All right, so Google's second step after discovery is crawling. Google crawls a page. So what this means, I love this GIF here of Wall-E because Google uses what we call a bot crawler, which means it's not a human being going and taking a look at your site and manually entering data. They actually send out a little bot crawler to go to your site and crawl it. And crawling basically means that they're collecting data about what's on the page, what's important to store in the index, and again, just storing that URL so they can easily access it later. And something that's important to know too is sometimes Google can stop right here. As with if we're talking about step one, the discovery process, sometimes Google could discover a URL but decide not to move forward with step two, crawling. Usually it has to do with maybe it's a page that the website owner doesn't want search engines to crawl. It may be a private page, or it might be a page that just isn't helpful for search results. So that's usually the cause for them not crawling. It could also be that they find a URL and once they visit that URL, there's nothing actually there. It could just be an outdated URL. In that case, they don't have anything to crawl. Google could also stop after step two. They may crawl a page and decide, hey, this isn't really relevant. There's nothing that we think would be relevant to search on this page. It could be that there are two URLs that go to the same page. Google's only going to use one of those. So they could stop after this because they're like, oh, well, we already have this page under a different URL in our index, so we're just not going to crawl it again because we basically already have it under a different address. All right, and finally, Google's step three. Google indexes your page. I also love this GIF too, because if you can imagine, Google's index is like a gigantic file cabinet, and the last thing I read about how large it is 100 million gigabytes is the size of Google's index. So if you can just imagine like the world's largest filing cabinet that just includes data on every web page they've ever crawled and decided to organize in there. So we want to make sure that your relevant pages that you want to show up in Google search make it all the way through step three. We want Google to see the page, crawl it, and decide that this is relevant and not have any sort of roadblocks to adding it to their index. All right, so now that we kind of get how Google works, we can move on to learning about Google Search Console. So this is a free tool created by Google. It helps you just make sure that your website is indexed by helping Google discover, crawl, and index your website. It also helps if Google has already indexed a page of your site and you've made some updates to that page. Google Search Console helps you sort of give Google a little nudge to say, hey, you need to update your index. I have some new information on this page. Another thing the tool does, it helps you monitor how your website's performing in search by giving you some really great reporting tools. It's important to know too that these tools will make your SEO work go further. It doesn't replace SEO work like making sure that your content is quality and relevant, making sure that you have that IPTC metadata and page metadata. We talked about that some at the webinar last week. So all of that SEO work is in and of itself what's going to make quality content that Google will want to index. Google Search Console just helps make that work go further by making sure Google has no barriers to finding the work that you've done. All right, so I'm about to hop into a demo on just how to get your website set it up with Google Search Console. Like Rachel said, I'm going to be using examples of PhotoShelter sites. The steps, though, are very similar, if not exactly the same, if you have a different website that's not on PhotoShelter. Yeah, let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to head over to Google Search Console. So the first time you come to Google Search Console, if you've never set it up before, you'll be met with this welcome page. If you have set it up before, you might already have your website in there, but this is where we can start to get set up. So there are several different ways to set up your website on Google Search Console. I'm just going to go over a couple that I think are really easy and straightforward and reliable. But obviously, feel free to visit Google's help pages if you're interested in figuring out more ways to do this setup process. All right, so I know with PhotoShelter and with a lot of other website hosts, generally with your website, you have the option to add a custom domain. And then, if you don't have a custom domain, if you're with PhotoShelter, you might have a web address for your site that's something like, my test site is called samsparks.photoshelter.com. So I'm going to go over ways to set it up, whether you have a custom domain or whether you're using a just default web host domain or a photoshelter.com domain. So let's get started. I'll start with my custom domain site. So I have a custom domain that's amandayoder.co. I have it set up with a test PhotoShelter site. So I'll go ahead and walk you through the steps if you are using a custom domain. So over here, I'm gonna select as my property type URL prefix. Your property is basically another word for your website. All right, so I'm gonna make sure that whenever I put in my URL for my website, I'm going to include the HTTPS and my full URL, which is www.amandayoder.co. Okay, hit continue. All right, now the next step is verifying my ownership. Google doesn't want anyone to be seeing this information about your website and meddling, so they want to make sure that you are the owner of this website. So for my custom domain, the most reliable way for me to verify my ownership is with a DNS record. So basically this, I'm going to be able to copy and paste a DNS record into my domain registrar account. So your domain registrar is where you purchased your domain. And Google's going to be asking me to create a TXT record. I'll go ahead and call it a text record. If this all sounds like Greek, I totally understand. It's just, it's some technical language, but it's pretty easy once you get the steps. So here's the record that Google wants me to put into my DNS. So I'm going to go ahead and click copy. And then I already have my domain registrar pulled up. So I purchased my domain amandayoder.co with Namecheap. There are other domain registrars out there. The most popular one's probably GoDaddy. But wherever you purchased your domain, you should be able to find your DNS manager, or here it's called Advanced DNS. And I will be able to come down here and click Add New Record. I want a text record. For the host, I'm going to put the @ symbol. This basically covers my root domain, amandayoder.co, as well as any subdomains like the www version. So I'm going to put the @ for host, and then I can simply paste in that record that I copied from Google. I'm going to save it. Awesome.
Hey, Amanda, quick question for you.
Yeah.
Kyle is asking, does my site have to be live to set it up on Google Search Console? Is there something you can kind of set up proactively, like while you're building your site, or does it have to be totally like live and published?
That's a good question. I know that with this particular setup method, if you do have a custom domain, because Google is going to your domain registrar to find this verification, you don't have to have your website live for that. I know if you are doing it, the second method I'm about to show in a moment, it's going to require Google to actually see your home page. So in that case, you wouldn't be able to do the second method until your website's live. But this one I'm going over now, it should be fine for you to go ahead and set this up before your website is live.
Great. And just one more before we continue on. Bill wants to know, do you have to list each page of your site, or is it okay to just list the home page?
Okay, for the setup, when we are verifying our property here, you can just put the home page of your site. So as I put here, amandayoder.co, every other page of my site is going to start with that URL, and Google knows that I'm verifying my ownership of every page that starts with this homepage URL. So you only need to verify ownership of the homepage.
Great.
Awesome. So where we were in the steps, I just added this text record to my custom domains DNS. Domain registrars will give you sort of a disclaimer of it could take up to 24 to 48 hours for this change to propagate. Usually it only takes a few moments, but it does depend on the registrar. But I'm going to go ahead and head back and see. Sometimes Namecheap is pretty fast with this. So once I've put in that record, I'm going to head back here where I've selected this domain name provider method, and I'm going to click verify. Awesome. Well, Namecheap was pretty fast with that, so that helps me go ahead and continue. So now I can click go to property. Okay, and there I am. I am all set up now with my property in Google Search Console. So I'll go ahead and show you guys if you do have a .photoshelter.com domain, or you're using a different website where you don't have your own custom domain purchased, I can show you an alternate method for that. So I'll go ahead and head back to the Search Console welcome page just to keep this nice and simple. Great, so this is where we were a moment ago. I'm still going to use this URL prefix method. I have another test site on PhotoShelter called samsparks.photoshelter.com. So again, I'm going to start with my HTTPS, and I'm going to put my full URL. All right, and click continue. Great. So since I don't own the photoshelter.com domain like I do with my amandayoder.co website, I'm going to need to use a different verification method to tell Google I do own this website. And that method I want to use here is called HTML tag. So very similar, I'm going to be able to copy and paste something that Google's already created for me. But the place I want to copy and paste this is actually onto the page of my website in what we call the HTML head section. So again, if that sounds totally foreign, completely understandable, at PhotoShelter, we make it easy to access this part of your site. So I'll show you where that is if you do have a PhotoShelter site. So I'll go ahead and copy what Google's wanting me to copy. And I'm going to head to my samsparks.photoshelter.com site. And I'm back here in the admin area of my site in the general settings. And this makes it easy for me to access here the HTML head code. So all I have to do now is click into this field and paste what I copied and click Save Settings. And this one, no matter what, will be instantaneous. Google will be able to visit your website and see that immediately. So while I'm under this HTML tag section, I'll click Verify. Awesome. So now I can click Go to Property, and I've got both of my properties in here. So that concludes the setup process. I can see in this top left dropdown, I've got both of my properties showing here, so I can toggle between the two. So that's the basics of the setup. It might seem a little bit confusing at first, but once you get the hang of the setup, you only have to do it once, so that's the good news.
Quick question for a PhotoShelter member from Matthew here. Would all of this setup carry over if you switched from one PhotoShelter template to another?
Yes, so this setup process is regardless of the template that you're using on your site or how your site is designed. Because your homepage URL will stay the same, because your custom domain stays the same, that's all that Google is really looking toward. They're not really looking to any of the design of the site, just that website address on where to find your site.
Right, right. And if you have something in your header code already, can you place this in there as well? Do you just do a space? Like how do you set that up?
Yes, absolutely. So if I were here in my general settings and I had some other stuff going on in the head code, you can leave whatever else is there and simply like hit the space button or the enter key and paste this HTML tag below what you already have there.
Great.
Awesome. So now that we're set up in Google Search Console, the very first thing you'll want to do when you get that set up is submitting your sitemap. So we talked about this a little bit earlier when it comes to Google's step one, which is discovery. Just to review, that discovery step means that Google needs to know that street address or URL of every page of your site so that they can know where to find it. The sitemap is basically like handing Google just a roadmap of every single address on your site. So if you can imagine trying to like travel the country and find a bunch of landmarks without a map would be pretty hard. But by submitting your sitemap, you're giving Google just a map that has every single landmark marked. It'll be so easy and quick for them to find those. Otherwise, they'll just be kind of guessing and shooting in the dark. All right, so again, I'm going to be using an example of a PhotoShelter site here to submit the sitemap, but any website host that you have will be able to help you find what your sitemap URL is. All right, so first things first, on a PhotoShelter site, the way that I can find my sitemap, I'm actually going to open a new tab here so I can show you guys. First, I'm going to go to what we call my robots page. So it's going to look pretty funny when we get there, but I'll show you. So I'll start by just typing in my website, amandayoder.co, and then I'm going to type in /robots.txt. So this takes me to this funny looking page. It's hard to understand, but that's because it's in robot language. And it's pretty normal, but the most important thing to us right now about this page is that it includes a direct link to my sitemap. So I'm going to be able to use this link to the sitemap to submit my sitemap to Google. So I'm going to head over to Search Console again. Where I can go to submit my sitemap is going to be here on the left under Sitemaps. Great. So you can see here I've submitted my sitemap before, but I'll go ahead and show you guys how I did that. Because of the way I set up my property here, oh, actually, I'm going to want to go into my amandayoder.co property. Awesome. So I'm going to submit my sitemap for this one. The sitemap submission is the same whether or not you have a custom domain. I'm just using my custom domain here as an example. But yes, you'll see I've already submitted my sitemap, but I'll go ahead and show you again how that works. They've already filled out the first part of the URL. So all I need now is what we call the URL slug, or the part that comes after the .co or .com. So I can go back to my robots page. I can find this URL slug, which is the part that comes after .com. I'm going to copy that. And then I can paste it right here and click submit. Awesome. So sitemap submitted successfully. Wow, that's a tongue twister. Awesome. So this is the message I want to get. So basically this means Google has stored my sitemap. They will now be able to use that for the rest of eternity to find the pages on my site. The good news about your sitemap too is what Google has is a link to your sitemap. Even though whenever you update your sitemap, the contents of your sitemap will change because you may have more landmarks or more pages marked on there. But the good thing is that Google hasn't basically copied everything that's on your sitemap and saved that. They have saved that web address that leads to your sitemap. And the good news about that means that even if your sitemap changes, the web address that leads to it never changes. So Google can keep going back to that address and finding any updates that you make to your site. So every once in a while, if you do make a ton of updates to your site, like maybe you upload 100 photos or a bunch of new galleries and you want to make sure that Google checks your sitemap again, you can always come back here and resubmit your sitemap. It's not required to do, I wouldn't say you need to do that every day or every week because Google will be periodically checking your sitemap. But if you're curious, this will always tell you down here under submitted sitemaps, it tells me the last time Google read my sitemap. So it looks like the last time Google read my sitemap was on July 17th. If I've made a bunch of changes since then, is today the 17th, Rachel?
It is.
Okay, cool. So they probably just read it because I just resubmitted it. But anyway, if this said something like April 29th, something crazy like that, and you're thinking, oh, wow, I've made so many changes since then, go ahead and resubmit your sitemap. It'll prompt Google to take another look, but you can rest assured that Google will check it periodically if you don't resubmit.
Yeah, I think you just answered this question, but there were a couple of questions about sitemaps, like, if I've submitted it and I resubmit it, does it cause any confusion for Google? Is it okay to resubmit it versus just waiting for them to read it again? And then again, I think you just answered this, but if you're making improvements, should you resubmit your sitemap after all those improvements have been made versus, setting all this stuff up right now, or does it not matter?
Yeah, so like I said, I think you're not going to do yourself a disservice by resubmitting your sitemap. Google won't get confused. It's really just a matter of, you can check this page, see the last time Google read your sitemap. If that date that's showing there concerns you, feel free to resubmit it. But you may find that like, oh, they just reread it last week, I don't need to resubmit it. So resubmitting is really just sort of giving Google like a nudge of like, hey, like, can you take another look at this? That's all it really does. So it can't hurt, but it's also not something that you have to do like every day.
Got it. Got it. And can you show just one more time how to find that robot text for people who might have
Yes,
missed it?
absolutely. So I'm going to open a new window here and type in first my website address.
Mm-hmm.
So this, I'm using my custom domain site. If I were using my .photoshelter.com domains, I would type in samsparks.photoshelter.com. So start here, /robots.txt. So this takes me to my robots page. And this has my sitemap URL. So this here, it says photoshelter.com. I realize that can be a little confusing at first. What's the most important thing is what we call the URL slug, which is the last half of the URL or what comes after .com. So that's the most important thing that you're going to want to copy when submitting your sitemap.
Great.
Awesome. All right, so now that you've submitted your sitemap, that's like, I would say 80% of the work. Like 80% of the benefit of having Google Search Console is having that ability to submit your sitemap and just get that roadmap in the hands of Google. But there are a few other tools that are super fun. I got really excited when I started learning about these tools because I just think it really puts control and power in the hands of website owners and photographers to not feel like you're constantly at the mercy of when is Google going to get around to seeing my website? You know, this makes you feel like you have more of a conversation with Google rather than just I don't know, just totally being at the mercy of whatever their timeline is. So the first thing I want to go over here is the URL inspection tool. The URL inspection tool, you can type in any URL from any page on your site and search for that specific page, and it will tell you information like, is this page already in Google's index? Has it been crawled, but maybe it's not indexed yet? Has it been discovered, but maybe not crawled yet? It will tell you exactly where in Google's process that page is. And then, you know, it'll give you reasons why. If it isn't already on Google in their index, it'll give you a reason why. It could just be that they haven't gotten around to indexing it yet. It could be that there's an error on the page. Maybe if you're sending them a URL to a photo that you've marked as unsearchable, meaning that you've basically said, I don't want search engines to index this. It will show you that there's an error on the page preventing them from doing that. So this is really great just to give you some more power and information on what's happening with each page of your site. One more thing that's really awesome about this, I'll show you in a moment. If you do see a page that either has not been indexed or maybe it has been indexed, but when you see it in Google search results, it looks off, like the page title's wrong or the description's missing. If you add any of that updates, add any of those updates to the page, you can request that Google re-index it and take another look at it and update their index. So I'll show you guys how this works. All right, so I'm back here in Google Search Console. I'm on my amandayoder.co property, and I can access this inspector tool either by clicking URL inspection here or simply clicking into this bar. So I'm going to start with my home page. I already have it. It looks like I searched it earlier, but so first I want to see, is the home page of my website in Google? I want to make sure that I always start with HTTPS. It's an important part of every website address. And I'll put in my full homepage URL and hit enter. Awesome. So Google's telling my homepage is in Google. That's really great. It tells me some other information like the page is mobile friendly. That's good to know. Most Google searches happen on mobile devices. So I'll give you guys another example here. I'm actually going to head to one of my portfolio galleries. I recently added a portfolio gallery to my site. Here's one called Norway. I just want to see, has Google indexed this yet? So I'm going to copy that full URL. I'm going to paste it in here and hit enter. Okay, this is good to know. I just added this gallery, so Google hasn't gotten a chance to crawl and index it yet. But what's awesome is I get to have control over sending Google a message and say, hey, can you please go ahead and index this instead of waiting around? So what I can do here is on the right, I'm going to click request indexing. This usually takes a moment. It's kind of just checking to make sure there aren't any initial errors on the page, preventing it from crawling it. But yeah, in just a moment, it should give me a thumbs up message.
While it's doing that, a question for you. Will making changes to a page cause Google to crawl it more often?
That's a good question. So I do know that Google really likes, as we've talked about in SEO before, Google really likes new content. Google does reward websites, like talking about websites being a collection of all your web pages on your website. Google does like when your website has constantly new information. They love that whenever they come back to your website, they find something new there. I'm not sure if I know if it would necessarily cause them to crawl it more often, but I do know, like with some pretty famous blogs out there, there's some super, like, I mean, huge blogs out there that Google does crawl them like almost every day, but it's stuff like, I don't know, like news websites like the New York Times. Google's probably crawling them multiple times a day because they know that that's a resource that needs to be updated often. I do think so I mean, if you get to like a larger level where Google starts seeing you as an authority on a topic, I think it's safe to say they'll start crawling you more often. This tool just gives you more power in saying like, hey, I did make updates. I want Google to see it sooner instead of waiting. And as you can see here now, it says I have requested indexing. So that means that that URL was added to a priority crawl queue. So I've been added to a list, an active list that they're working through. If I try to request again, it's not necessarily going to move me up in that list. But what it will do is, what this will do is, it usually takes about a week or two for Google to finish crawling. But the good thing about that is, like, if I weren't to request indexing on this portfolio gallery, it could take Google months before they index this. So that's the power of this inspection tool. Awesome. I'm just going to hit got it here. And if I ever want to type in my portfolio gallery URL again and just check the status, I can always do that, and I'll be able to check back here. And probably in a week or two, I'll be able to check back. It'll say that the URL is on Google. So that's really fun when you get to start seeing those results. Awesome. So a few more tools I want to touch on before we wrap up. These are probably the other most powerful tools in Search Console. So first we have some reports. These are just some analytics on how is your website doing in Google. So index coverage report, it will show you how much of your website has been indexed by Google. And it'll give you, if there are always going to be pages of your website that haven't been indexed for any given reason. And usually it's stuff like, I know with PhotoShelter, we make sure that Google isn't indexing things like the cart page or the client login page, things that just aren't helpful for search results. So you might see some things in there like that that are just not getting indexed, but this will kind of show you, if you did just submit your sitemap, Google is taking some time to slowly go through that and start indexing things. So it'll kind of show you the status of that. I'll just pop in there to go ahead and show you as I'm talking about it. So that coverage report is going to be over here on the left under coverage. As you can see, my test site here is a pretty small website. I don't have like I don't have like several galleries going on. So, but the good news is I don't have any errors on my website preventing them from crawling. I can click here to see how many valid pages are on my site and sort of the timeline of that. So that's great. And then I can also see if I do have any excluded pages. Usually these are pages that, like I said, that either we don't really want Google to see. It could be photos that I have marked as unsearchable and don't want in search results. It could also be things where, like I said before, if there's a page of your site that can be accessed by 2 different URLs, Google's only going to index one of those URLs. They're going to exclude the other one. So it's totally normal to have some excluded things here. And what's really awesome about Search Console is you can click on anyone and figure out, what URL does this apply to, and even go to Google Help for some more information to interpret it. Awesome. So the next report here is a performance report. This is definitely the most high value report that they have to offer. So this will actually show you how your website's doing when people actually put in search queries. So if I head back over to Search Console, I can find this over here under performance. So this is really cool. Again, like I said, my site isn't very big. It's just a site that I kind of use for testing a lot. But what's cool about this, it will give me a timeline and sort of help me see over time how my site's doing in search. It will show me impressions. So impressions mean that your website came up as a search result. It doesn't necessarily mean somebody clicked on it, but the fact is that it came up. So that's great to have an impression. The position, obviously, this would be when you're wondering, like, what is my rank? How do I rank in Google? We also call that your position. So the average position over here is going to be, on average, when your website does show up in search, what position is it? So mine right now is, on average, it's position 18 when it does show up. And then average CTR. CTR is short for click-through rate. So this percentage means that, I may have had 15 impressions, but only 6% of those impressions resulted in someone clicking into my website. So if I check this, I can also see obviously you guys are gonna have a lot more data than me probably from my tiny little site. But yeah, it's gonna show me over time how these different metrics have changed. I can also go down here and see things like queries. What kind of things did people search that brought up my site? I would hope that if somebody searched my name, my website would come up. So I guess I'm doing well there. Yeah, it'll also show me which pages showed up in search results and how many clicks it got. It's just a wealth of information about how your website's performing.
Over there where it says average position 18.2, we have somebody asking, like, what exactly does that mean? Like, what sort of units is that measuring? Or if you can explain a little bit more.
Of course. So average position means, let's just say, I'm gonna pop over to Google here. I'm just gonna type in wedding photographer, just as an example. So first we see these, if it says ad, that means it was paid. So it's not organic search results. So my organic search results start down here. So this search result would be position 1. This is position 2, position 3, and so on. So if my website is on average position 18, for me, I'm looking at this page, and 18 I think would be like on the 2nd or 3rd page. But it basically means, in order of what search results appear, what number position am I?
Got it.
Does that make sense, Rachel?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, cool.
And I think you're going to talk about this next, but we have a couple of people asking about how to de-index pages or hide certain pages from showing up in search results for any number of reasons that might come up with, clients not wanting their photos out there, whatever it might be.
Yes, so also another really awesome tool in Search Console is the content removal tool, which is just for that. You can request that Google remove certain pages that are coming up in search results. Sometimes this will happen if, if you accidentally have galleries that were supposed to be private that you didn't have marked as private or unsearchable at first, and Google kind of got a hold of them before you could mark them as unsearchable. It could be that you do have a public gallery and you meant for it to be public, but perhaps the subject of a photo contacted you and said, like, hey, I was okay with this, but I'm not anymore. Can you remove this photo? You can delete it from your website, but Google's still going to have it stored in their index until they visit that URL again and see that it's no longer there. So we can find this content removal tool under removals. And I'll show you guys an example here. A fun way to see, actually, a quick shortcut for seeing what pages of your site Google has already indexed. You can actually go to Google and type in site, and your full website URL. So I've typed in site : www.amandayoder.co. I'm going to hit enter. So as I said, I have a bit of a small site right now. So I can see that right now, in terms of pages, I have 6 pages that are in Google's index. I'm taking a look. I'm like, oh no. This gallery down here, España, this is my family vacation gallery. I don't want this to be in Google. This is just supposed to be me sharing it with my family. So I'd rather this not be just showing up for anyone to see in Google. So what I can do, I can just grab this URL that Google has. And an easy way to do that is just clicking right-click, copy link address. I can head back over here to the removals tool. I'll click new request and paste that URL. I'm going to say remove this URL only. Great. So what this is telling me is that Google's going to remove this for 6 months. In that 6-month time, as long as you do the work, I need to head back to my website and make sure that that gallery is marked as unsearchable. I need to make sure that it's private so that Google can't access it again. all it means by the 6 months is that like they'll immediately remove it. They'll check back in 6 months, and if it's not there, they're not going to reindex it. So, or if it's private, they're not going to reindex it. So I'll go ahead and submit this request. Awesome, and I can always check back here to see the status. So that's a very helpful tool when it comes to sort of like little oopses that happen with Google. Awesome. So that just gives you guys an overview of how to get set up with Search Console and just the benefit and the tools that it has to offer that will just supercharge your SEO work. So just in conclusion, like I said, it's one of many SEO tools out there. It doesn't replace the other work you're doing with, you know, looking at your image metadata, looking at your web page metadata, working on those backlinks. A lot of these terms, if you're unfamiliar with them, feel free to check out our webinar from last Friday. We also have a blog post and some great support articles with all the nitty-gritty SEO best practices. But all this to say, Search Console doesn't replace that work, but what it does is it supercharges or it amplifies that work by making sure that Google can see the work you've been doing and index those pages. And again, it's also a great way to measure your SEO progress. Those analytics, that performance report is going to give you a wealth of information about how the SEO work you're doing is having an impact. So just a few thoughts to leave you with. Don't sweat the techie stuff. A lot of the things you might have seen today, and as you continue to explore Search Console, some of the lingo just might feel like it's going over your head. Don't sweat it. All of this is a learning curve for anyone just getting started with SEO or just getting started with Search Console. I know at least at PhotoShelter, when it comes to some of the really techie stuff like duplicate canonical page or you know, H1 tags and structured data, things like that. Our team at PhotoShelter is working all of that for you. Everything that's under the hood of your website, we are working to keep that up to date. We've been doing a lot of work on that recently. So for you, the point you should focus on is the big picture. What is the big picture? Instead of, I think when we get things like analytics, like this performance report, it's so satisfying to see changes that sometimes we can get really anal about it and just be checking every day and being like, okay, I like added some stuff yesterday, like how is it doing now? I think that's a temptation for all of us because it's exciting to see progress. The thing with SEO though, it's a long game, it's not a short game. So the work you're putting in today, you're gonna see results from that 2 weeks from now, you're gonna see a lot more results from that 3 months from now. So really just focus on the big picture. Don't get hung up on the minute details or the, you know, the maybe tiny changes that might happen from day to day. And then lastly, be open to learning as you go. SEO is a huge, huge topic. I mean, there are people who their entire career is just doing SEO. So don't get discouraged if it feels overwhelming. Tackle one little bite at a time, one little tool at a time. Follow your curiosity. I always like to say that. That's curiosity is probably the best motivator, especially when it comes to SEO. So just stay open. SEO is going to continue to change. We're going to have to continue to adapt and just have fun. Awesome. So here are just some resources that we wanted to share with you guys. Search Console help. Google actually has really helpful support articles that help you understand those nitty-gritty details, help you understand some of the lingo. I don't think we could do any better than them. It's their product. But we also do have, you know, our PhotoShelter Support Center also has a really helpful article that will review all of these setup steps, all of the overview of those tools if you are a PhotoShelter member. Search Console also has a community discussion board. So, you know, if there is a specific question you have, maybe somebody else has asked the same question and you can look it up in that community. So yeah, that's that was a lot of information, but it's really fun once you start getting the hang of things.
Yeah, that was great, Amanda. Thank you so much. Such a wealth of knowledge. And we're going to take the next 10 to 15 minutes to answer more questions if anybody has them. I know there's a bunch that have come through that we haven't asked yet, so we can start digging into those. If you want to hand presentation back to me, that'd be great.
I can do that. Awesome.
All right, so we had a few questions from a few different people about how Google Search Console relates to or differs from Google Analytics? Is it connected to your Google Analytics account? How are the stats that you're looking at here? How do they differ from what you see in Google Analytics? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I do see them as two separate tools because they have two separate focuses. Google Search Console is very much and exclusively just how your website does in Google Search. So the data that it's going to give you is going to be all about what happens before someone even gets to your site. And it's all just people discovering your site through Google search, specifically Google. It's not going to show you stats from other search engines like Bing or Yahoo. So that's very specific to Google Search Console. Whereas Google Analytics starts tracking data from the time people enter your site. They're going to be able to see anytime someone comes to your site from a search engine or from social media or from a direct link or from another website. Google Analytics is going to give you that full breadth of information. And not only are they going to show you how someone got to your site, they're going to be able to give you data on, not only where they came from, how they got there, what they did once they got to your site. So Google Analytics is very focused on what happens once somebody, while someone's getting to your site and while they're on your website. There is a way that Google Search Console and Google Analytics do work together. I know recently Google did make this update to where in the past, before they updated Search Console, you could get a lot of those same search analytics in Google Analytics. They would tell you things like what keywords someone searched for to get to your site. But Google Analytics has recently updated to where in order to see that data in Google Analytics, you actually have to integrate with your Search Console site or your Search Console account. So feel free, if you do want to connect those accounts, there absolutely is a way to do that. And you can just do a quick search on Google's help pages, and they have awesome step-by-steps to show you how to do that.
Great. And for those of you who are asking, yes, we are recording this and we will be sharing this on the blog next week. So you will be notified as soon as that recording is ready. We have another question here. If you have more than one site that you're using with GSC, is it easy to sort of toggle back and forth? Do you exit and log back in to see your other site?
So the way it works is as long as you were logged into the same Google account. So like for me, I have a Google account under my email address. So whether you're logged into, when you're logged into your Google account, as long as you verified each of those websites under the same Google account, it's really easy to toggle between. It's just there. I showed it for a moment, but I might have grazed over it too quickly. If you're logged into your Search Console account, and it's like the top left corner, you'll see the name of the property you're on. Like for me, I would look to the top left corner and see my amandayoder.co website. But I could just click a simple drop down and get to my other website that I have in there. So it's really easy to toggle between as long as you have them connected to the same like Google email address.
Great. And a question about the Google Images licensing beta that will be coming soon. Will you be able to track any information regarding that on GSC, or do we know enough about that yet?
I have not seen a tool for that yet in Google Search Console. It would not surprise me though. Once Google's still in beta with that program, so it would not surprise me that once they finish their beta program and really get that up and running, they may add a tool to Search Console to help you get some more metrics on that. But so far they haven't built that yet.
Okay, great. And then once you see a trend in GSC, can you continue improving results through normal SEO methods? And I think the answer is yes, but just wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so when you're seeing trends, so this would be like looking at your performance reports, I assume, and seeing an upward trend. Yeah, I think that's just when, when viewing any sort of data like this, right, we kind of have to read between the lines and figure out like, oh, I see a trend. Maybe I see an upward trend over the past few months. You kind of have to do your own detective work about like, what did I do that might have prompted that? You can take a look at the keywords people were searching to find your things. You can take a look at which pages were actually coming up the most. A great example might be like, oh, I noticed that I've been getting a lot more traffic, and I noticed that what's been getting traffic are my galleries that are pertaining to COVID-19. And so, oh, wow, maybe it's because I have relevant content that's relevant to, I mean, unfortunately, a global crisis, but, current events. Like I have content that is related to what people are searching for. People right now, that's what they're thinking about. That's what they're going to be going on Google searching. You may notice a trend where, oh, the things that I have that are more relevant to current events are the things that are giving me an uptick. Maybe I can continue to repeat that pattern by making sure that my metadata is all relevant to how the photos relate to what people are searching, and continue to create content that's relevant to what people are interested in right now.
Awesome. And a couple of questions here about mobile usability. So somebody's asking if we could just share a little bit more information, like how much attention should you be giving to this section? And if we just have anything to share on, like, should people be looking there first, given that so much of site traffic comes through on mobile now, or do we have any information we can share on that?
Yes, I would say it's very important to look at mobile usability. Yes, whoever asked the question, you're right. So much search is coming from mobile. It is very important that your website is mobile friendly. Google actually takes this into account in terms of like, okay, so I hate to use the word like that they penalize you, because I think it's bad to think of things in those terms, that it's reward and punishment. Google doesn't reward or punish you. They're truly looking at what is relevant. And Google thinks that mobile friendly sites are more relevant because more people are searching on mobile. So it is important to take a look at your mobile usability. The great thing about PhotoShelter, if you are a PhotoShelter member, Google made some recent changes over the past year in how they look at websites and how they look at the mobile usability of websites. In our recent SEO projects, we did some edits just to get back up to date with how Google does that. And we did see several months ago some little inconsistencies with mobile usability and what Google was seeing. So we already did the work for you. If you're a PhotoShelter member, we've already gone in, sort of opened the hood of everyone's website and optimized your mobile usability. So that's great news if you're a PhotoShelter member.
Awesome. Okay. Going to see if we have any other questions here. I know some people have sent over some specific situations, errors you might be seeing or some issues you might be having. And for those things, we will do our best to answer those questions after today's presentation. And again, we're going to do a full FAQ on the blog as well. And so we'll try to make sure that those are included there. Speaking of the blog, I did want to let everybody know before we sign off that if you missed our first webinar in this SEO series, you can head over to the blog at blog.photoshelter.com to check out the recording from that session, as well as the full FAQ from that webinar. And you'll also find more SEO information there on the blog from our co-founder and general manager, Grover, on what we've been doing recently to help boost SEO for our members, as Amanda mentioned. And lastly, for some of the new folks with us today, we are offering a 14-day trial plus 30% off your first year with PhotoShelter with the promo code GSC webinar. So if you are interested in trying PhotoShelter and seeing what we can do to help with your visibility online, we hope that you will check us out. I'm going to do one last little run through the questions box here to see if we have anything else, because we do have a few more minutes. Give me one sec. All right, well, I think that wraps us up. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, we will do our best to answer that over on the blog. And thanks again to everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much to Amanda.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll see everyone soon.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.